Hi, everybody. Um, Welcome. I'm Ankit Desai, and today's session, I'm going to be going deeper into market research and how do you do market research to drive your product strategy. In terms of my introduction, currently work at LinkedIn as a product manager. I have about 10 years of experience as a product manager in various enterprise companies. And before being a product manager, I was a developer. So I can empathize with the developers and some of the technical considerations that we have to make in terms of creating a good product. In terms of my passion, I'm really passionate about understanding customer requirements, problems, and the issues that our customers face, and how do we create the most elegant solutions for our customers, especially in the enterprise space. Okay. Without further ado, let me go and start talking about what I'm going to be discussing today or talking about today. So in terms of the agenda, I'm going to be going deeper into market research and what it really means and why is the market research really important for product managers. I'm going to be talking about certain various ways to do market research. I'm going to be picking the two most common market research techniques or methods. One is around surveys and another one is around one-on-one user interviews. And then I'll pull everything together into a single slide so that if you miss certain sections or certain parts, there's key messages right there on the slide itself. Okay, let's move on. Before I go into market research, before I go to anything else, let me talk about, or let me put a very famous slide from one of the best visionaries and the product people that we have, that we used to have, Mr. Steve Jobs from Apple. He very famously once said that our job as a product manager or as product leads is to figure out what customers want before they think they want something or before they do. Okay. It is really, really critical for product managers to actually, read things which are not yet on the page. Okay. Because generally he was a very firm believer of the fact that people really don't know what they want until you show it to them. He was not a firm believer of a traditional sense of marketing research where you are asking customers what they want. Market research is really critical because for you it is in order for us to understand without asking the customers what they want, we as product managers, we need to understand the problems that customers are facing and the issues that they have. Without that understanding, product managers can really fail very badly. Moving on, let's talk about some of the past products which have really struggled to gain traction, right? And it is a possibility that the market research or doing a proper market research could have prevented that. So let's talk about Microsoft Zoom. In 2006, Microsoft released Zoom, which was a very which was a product which to compete with Apple iPod in the music space, right? In the music broadcast or playback space. Zoom was released to a lot of fanfare, but at the same time, it did not gain enough traction from customers. The reason for that is it really lacked some innovation, and at the same time, customers were not very clear how does it really compete with iPod, which was already very popular at that point of time. Another example, 3D TVs. I don't know how many of you remember 3D TVs, but they became really popular in 2010, 11, 12 kind of a time period when the movie Avatar came out. And people were really, they were wondering what it is, right? But again, after a few years, 3D TVs did not take on. And the reason for that is it needed a special equipment called glasses, which did not fit well there was no standard for glasses. So one glasses would not fit the other TVs and so on and so forth. But more importantly, there was not enough content out there. Which you can use to use the 3D TVs at the full potential. And then another example is Pepsi, right? Pepsi came out with a Crystal Pepsi, which was a pure and clear version of the Pepsi. This was out. This was back in 1980s, right? When pure and clear were buzzwords during, when were with the drinks. And Pepsi thought, hey, it's a great idea. Let us create a pure and clear version of Pepsi. It tastes like Pepsi, but it looks like liquid, or it looks like water. And again, it did not really go well because customers couldn't associate themselves with drinking a clear and pure color water or a color drink with the taste of Pepsi in it. These products did not really catch up, right? And the reason for that is there was a lack of customer interest after launch. The question is, could proper market research have prevented this? Possibly, I don't know. But I just wanted to highlight a few examples here to set the stage. Okay, so why is market research important? Market research is really critical, and it's one of the single most important role of a product manager. Market research is critical in order to understand for the product manager who are the customers, what are their personas, and everything around that, all the details on the customers, right? Who are these customers, which age group they fall under, where do they live, what are their preferences, and so on and so forth. Because if you as a product manager, you're not understanding your customers well, there's a very good chance that you will not be able to create the products that customers love and customers will be able to use. More importantly, you want to understand the problems that customers are facing, right? If you don't understand the problems and the issues that customers face from time to time, you will not be able to create a product or develop a product which customers will be able to solve their problems with, right? And it's very important to understand how big the problems are, right? How often they face. If the problems happen once a while, maybe it's not a very big problem to solve for. Maybe it is. I don't know, right? Depends on the industry. But at the same time, it is very, very important for you to figure out the impact of the problem and then and the details of the product itself. Another thing is customer requirements and use cases. If you can get as much information on some of the use cases and how customers, what kind of problems they have and when these problems occur, as well as some of the use cases around it, that'll be great. And then the fourth one, which is very overlooked aspect of product management, is to finding more information about the competitors. It is really critical to understand who the competing products are in the space that you are in. So it's not just about the products itself. It is also about there's some workaround maybe the customers are using, and that might be working well. They might not be working well, right? How elegant the solutions are, right? It's very, very important to understand the products, which could be competitors to your product, or at the same time, some workarounds or some that people have actually, over the time, they have figured out things. And maybe that is going to help you with your market research. Okay, so those are the four main things which are really critical from a market research standpoint. Here's the process that I generally recommend and I generally use when it comes to market research. The first and most important thing is identify the problem. If you're not sure in your head as a product manager, what is the problem that you're trying to solve for, it is very likely the case that the market research or whatever research you do in terms of the product itself, the output is not going to be great. Okay. So it's very important for you to figure out what's the problem you're trying to solve for, even if it's at a high level, right? You don't have to be perfect. Your market research process is going to do a deeper dive into the areas of the problem that you are trying to solve for. But at least at a high level, you should have a very good understanding of the problem statement. And then once you have it, develop a research plan. It is very important for you to get all the information before you start the market research process, because it is going to help you with making sure that all the things that you want from the market research, you have it before you start the actual research. And then you decide what kind of research or methods you'll use, which I'm going to go through in the next few slides. But it's very important for you to figure out which research methods you'll use, because it depends on the problem, it depends on the space you are in, it depends on your customers, it depends on a lot of different factors. Conducting the research, again, once you have done all your groundwork, you have identified the problem, you have made sure that you have all the information to start the research, you have outlined all the questions, everything like that, you've done all the groundwork. The next step is actually conducting the research, executing the research using the methods that you choose, and then, of course, collecting the data. The next step after that is analyzing all the data that you've collected. It could be a lot of data to collect and a lot of data for analysis, right? Which is good, More data is better. And then interpreting the results and reporting the findings. And then last one is taking action. How do you create an appropriate plan for execution? Define MVP, the metrics that you want to measure along the way. How do you execute the POC and then ultimately take your product to completion for the end users? It's a 5-step process. I think I think it could be a lot, but at the same time, it has to be done right. Otherwise, your market research is not going to go good, right? You won't be able to understand the problem statement in detail. Okay, ways to do market research. There's multiple ways of, or there's actually two ways of doing market research. One is primary research method and secondary research method. Let's talk about both of them in detail. Okay. Secondary research, we'll start with that first. It's really the research methods that you do outside of your immediate customers, right? Things like you're going to your favorite search engine and trying to understand the industry, trying to understand the space that you operate in, try to understand the product that you are operating in, looking at newspaper articles, looking at some of the interviews from the experts, even going to university websites and opening up and looking at academic papers, and so on and so forth. It is really critical for you to understand the space, for you to understand the products that the space operates in, for you to understand which other players are out there in this space. And that's where secondary research helps a lot. However, product managers should spend majority of their time in primary research. Primary research really revolves around your customers and your products, okay? And it is really typically broken down into two areas. One is what people do and what people say. What people do really means that really works well when you already have a product that you're working with, okay? So things like you can do A/B testing on your website or on your application. You can do eye tracking, usability studies, clickstream analysis, search log analysis, right? Those are all the various ways of doing market research, where you're trying to figure out what people are doing on your site, on your application, on your product, whatever the case is. And it really works well when there's a product already out there or it's close to being out there. And then on the right side, what people say, right? Without, let's say, showing them the actual product or anything around that, you actually ask them a bunch of questions, you send them a survey, you actually do some techniques like cart sorting, focus groups. And this really works well when you're starting the product from ground up, when you don't have anything else to show, right? And when you don't have a product, but you're trying to create a product, you're trying to create a space for your product, right? And that's where it is, these kind of techniques go, those are really important. Product managers should actually make sure that they are spending majority of their market research time in primary research. It's really critical. Let's focus on two of the most common market research techniques, which is surveys and one-on-one user interviews. I like both of them, and both of them should be, they are complementary to each other rather than, one should be used and another should not be used. I think both of them, they have their own space, because what surveys will allow you to do is it is going to provide you with quantitative information, okay, from a large data set. So think of it this way, that you as a product manager or you just as a general consumer, I'm sure you would have received a lot of surveys, right, from time to time to fill out. And most of the time, maybe you fill out the survey, maybe you don't fill out the survey, right? But when you send the survey out to a large data set, or large group of users, there's a good chance that you'll get back more survey results that will accurately represent the problem statement that you're trying to get the answer to. Okay, so make sure that you're sending the surveys out to as many people as possible, as many accounts as possible, so that it provides you with the quantitative information from a large data set. And then once you are done with the surveys, next step is actually to do one-on-one user interviews, right? Which is where you get the qualitative information from the subset of the people. Let's say you send out the survey to 1,000 people, right? But you will be able to do user interviews with not all the 1,000 people, but only a subset of people, maybe 20, 30, 40, whatever that number is, right? But it is important to make sure that you are doing one-on-one user interviews with a subset of people which are representative of your typical customer. It is going to provide you with qualitative information, and it is going to allow you to go deeper into the problem statement that you're trying to solve for. I'm going to be covering both of these techniques in detail over the next few slides. So let's talk about surveys first. Attributes of a good survey, right? As I said before, it is very important for you to send out surveys across as many channels as possible to gather maximum number of responses. Remember, you are trying to optimize for volume here, okay, and quality at the same time. The more survey results you have, more reliable and trustworthy the results will be, okay? Let's say your total addressable customer set is, let's say, 1 million users, right? Or let's take a smaller number, let's say 10,000 users, right? But if you only get the survey back from, let's say, 10 people, that is not going to be representative of your of your entire customer base. You need to make sure that you're getting a representative sample. I'm going to talk about it in the next slide. Well, how do you find the representative sample for the survey that you send out? But the attributes of a good survey are: questions should be quantifiable. Okay, that means that instead of asking them, generic questions with generic responses, you should ask them specific questions with specific responses back. Okay, maybe it's multiple choice, maybe whatever the answer to the question is, right? Make sure the questions are quantifiable. And similarly, make sure the questions are close-ended. I have examples of each of them in the next slide, but that is going to help you, form your questions in a very intelligent manner. Make sure your questions are unbiased and they are not skewed one way or the other. It is very important as product managers for us to figure out that for us to create the questions or create the script in such a way that you're not biasing the response. Okay, if you ask a user a question in certain way, you're going to get the response back in the way that it was asked, right? So unbiased questions are really critical when you send out the surveys. And last but very, very important thing, make sure your surveys are short. They complete in 5 minutes or less, right? If they go longer, make sure there's some incentive for people to complete, because the longer the survey is, the higher the drop-off rate will be as people go on with the survey. Some examples of what good survey versus bad survey means. Okay, so good surveys will be like, let's start with the first quadrant on the left side. Make sure the questions are unbiased. Okay, instead of do you like our website, yes and no, how would you rate the website, right? So you're not feeding them the answer because the way you position your questions or the way you write your questions, that's how you're going to get the answers. Okay, make sure your questions are close-ended. Again, instead of what's the best and the worst part of the online store and with the broad open-ended text, make sure your questions are close-ended with a scale from 1 to 10, with a yes, no, with whatever 1 to 5 or whatever that scale is, but make sure they are as close-ended as possible. It is good to have open-ended questions, but not many. Okay, most of the survey should be around close-ended questions, but if you want to get free text responses, it is okay to have few questions on free text responses, but don't make them mandatory, because free text responses adds a lot of time for the users to fill in. Make sure our questions are simple to understand. I cannot stress this enough, right? If you as an end user, you are not able to understand the question in one go, you'll probably skip the question, right? So make sure they are simple to understand, and make sure again they are quantifiable. The most important thing is, once you create a survey, send it out to a few users, maybe your colleagues, your friends, whoever it is, and make sure the survey makes sense to them, right? If a survey does not make sense to an outside user or to a layman, I think you're not going to get back good responses from the survey. How, once you finish sending out the survey and you're getting the responses back, how do you analyze these responses? It is really critical, right? One of the most important thing I emphasize is, make sure that the response size is representable sample of the target market. Okay, let's say that your target market contains across all the geos like APEC and EMEA and North America and so on and so forth, right? But at the same time, you only get the responses back from people in North America and don't get a lot of responses from APAC. That means one size of the population is heavily represented in the survey and another size is not represented, which is not a good thing. If you have customers all over the world or all over in different age groups or whatever the case is, right? Make sure you're getting the survey responses back from everybody from a representable sample. Otherwise, your survey is going to be skewed and biased towards one set of people, and it will not give you an accurate representation of everything of the solution to the problem that you're trying to solve for. Use a sample size calculator, okay, to determine what's the statistical significance, significant number of responses to get. Okay, if it's, let's say, 10,000, 20,000 people that are in your overall customer base, make sure that you're using some sort of an online calculator. There's a bunch of them available, right? To know that, okay, you need to have at least 300, 400 responses back. Otherwise, if you get 20, 30, 50 responses back, it's not going to help you, because that's not going to represent your target market well. Summarize the responses once you get all the responses back, and by questions, by different sections, how that survey is going to be spread out or that created. And then make sure you provide key insights and recommendations based on the survey responses. It is really critical, right? Make sure that you have the key insights from the survey itself and put forward your recommendations so that your stakeholders and everybody can review the recommendations and give you a green light on that. Okay, let's move on. Let's talk about the user interviews, which is one of the most important things in the market research. User interviews, remember, they provide you with qualitative information. Okay, here you're not going broad, you're going deep into the problem statement. So for you, the best practices are, you start with the goal. Start with trying to understand what is it you're trying to get out of the user interviews, right? Or user sessions, and create a script and a template. It is very important for you to figure out how many questions you want to ask to the user, and they should be ideally be one-on-one. Okay, if it's more people on the call, then it's possible that you will not get the responses that you want from the user, because more people adds more pressure to answer questions, right? And people might not open up, right? So it's very important to have it one-on-one. Make sure you're recording the session with, of course, their permission, so that you can review back the recording, and then you have something to look into. Okay, but remember, during the session, you're there to listen. You're there to understand the user problems. So how you want to do this is, start with setting the expectations and ground rules. Let them know beforehand that you are there to make your product better, or create a new product, or understand the problem, right? You're not there to judge people, right? Or you're not there to, there's no right or wrong answer to the questions. Make sure they're comfortable with what you're trying to do. Always start with low intensity questions, right? Where do they work? How was your day, right? Things like that. You're trying to build trust with the individual for however long that session is, 30 minutes, 1 hour, whatever that session is. Make sure you start with certain easier questions, and then you go into high intensity questions, which is where majority of your presentation should be, or majority of your user interview should be around. And after the session, send them notes to confirm the responses. Ideally, I would recommend to not take notes during the session itself, because that is going to distract you from answering and probing people into certain areas of the interviews. So please record the session, take the notes offline, and then send them the notes after the session to just confirm the responses. There are good chances that somebody is going to either say, "Hey, I agree with all this stuff," or maybe they forgot a few things to tell us, and that would be another chance for them to get back and provide us with more responses. At the same time, user interview is a good it's a good way to also solicit and look for any new customers that you want. Okay, or maybe you want to send them POC, included them in the POCs or proof of concepts, or you want to run by a few designs with them, right? It is very important that you're building that relationship with the people, so that you have somebody to talk to during your product development process. Typically, during the user interviews, you're trying to ask the user certain questions. All of your questions should start with who, what, when, why, where, and how. Okay, it's very, very critical, because if you don't keep your questions open-ended, okay, there's a good chance that you'll not get a good answer back. Remember, the whole purpose of the user interview is for you to speak less and for them to speak more. Okay, so open-ended questions allow you to do that, and seek clarity, examples as much as possible. Again, you don't have to stick to the script. Okay, whatever script you have created is just a guideline for you. If a person wants to veer off in another direction, but they are providing good information, it is okay to go off script. It is okay to go deeper into certain other problem areas that you did not think that they might have, right? But the question should really revolve around what's the problem faced by the user, how painful they are, how painful the problem is, who is the user, or what's the persona of the user that faces this problem, when and how often the user faces this problem, how did the user solve the problem, right? Is very important. Do they have a solution? And maybe there's a solution but they don't like it. Maybe there's a solution and they're used to it. Maybe there's no solution to it, right? All these things have to be figured out during the user interview process, because it is going to help you with defining the problem statement much better. And then once you're done with all the interview responses, the most important thing as a product manager you're looking for is the patterns. Okay, you're not trying to create a product for one person, hopefully, right? You're trying to create product that can be used by multiple people. Okay, so make sure that you are multiple users have mentioned the same problem for it to be considered for a solution. If only one person mentions one problem, then I don't think it's worth a lot of time and effort to go deeper into it. But at the same time, let's say multiple users go in and they say, you know what, I have the same question, or I have the same problem, and maybe there's no solution to the problem. Maybe there's a solution, but it's not acceptable. There's a possibility that entire process can be improved. So those are the kind of things that you're looking for from a one-on-one user interview. Okay, last slide. So let me bring everything together. Market research is critical. Okay, it is one of the most important things, and the role of the product manager. Before anything, before you start any product development process, make sure you understand your customers. Make sure you understand their problems, their potential use cases, their competitors, or the competitors of the product. maybe there's a workaround, right? Whatever it is, make sure you note down everything before you do any product development process. There's two ways of doing market research: primary and secondary. However, make sure that as a product manager, you're spending most of the time in the primary research methods. And two of the most common methods are surveys and interviews. Okay, take a look at both of them. Try to use both of them. One can be used with the other. They are both complementary. And for surveys, make sure that you are getting as much quantitative information as possible, which is needed for market research. And make sure your questions are unbiased, close-ended. Make sure your entire survey is completes in 5 minutes or less. One-on-one user interviews provide qualitative research information, okay, which is really complementary to surveys. It is important for you to listen to the users, their problems. It is important for you to figure out the broad spectrum of the problems and how many people are actually having this problem, right, to begin with, because that's going to allow you to find the impact that you're trying to solve the problem you're trying to solve for. Okay. With that, I'm going to end the session here. Thank you all.